My name is Clay Williams, and this is People Talks, presented by Canal Pursuit Productions. The idea behind People Talks is that everyone has a story, and that everyone's story has value. People Talks is a mixture of people with lived experience and people who work in health and fitness fields, one speaker each week. This week's speaker is Ken Porter, National Program Manager with Mood Disorder Society of Canada. Ken is a mental health advocate and educator. At Mood Disorders, he's the manager of the National Defeat Depression campaign and other projects, as well as lead in information technology for the society. He's passionate about the importance of mental health, storytelling, and peer support. With 25 years experience working in the mental health field and more than 15 years of project management experience, he's recognized for his skills in mental health, social services, community outreach, nonprofits, employment, and training. He's part of the leadership team that was recognized with the Sharing the Flame Award in 2007 by the Canadian Council on Learning. Ken has served on numerous boards and committees and is a graduate of the Social Service Worker program at Northern College and Athabasca University's Human Resources Professional degree program. Welcome to People Talks, Ken.
Oh, welcome. Thank you, Clay. I appreciate that. It's weird when you hear somebody do an introduction for you and read your bio. It always seems a little odd. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I've worked with you for a few years now. I guess probably at least 4 or 5. I'm not sure if were you involved in the first Canal Pursuit in
I think
2015.
Yeah, in a lesser degree. I think at that time I was still managing our Work With Us project, which was a mental health arthritis project to help employers learn about mental health and arthritis. But I was always, as soon as I came on board, our executive director and I worked together a long time ago, and so he knows my technical ability. So chances are I was probably helping out technically in that first year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and yeah, the story that got you to where you are today.
Where to begin? Where to begin? And it all starts in my childhood. No, it always does actually start in your childhood. I can remember having an understanding about mental health and mental health awareness even before I truly understood what exactly that meant. You know, when I was a kid, my family would refer to me as being shy, right? And because I can remember as a kid, my parents going out to see a movie, and before they left, I asked them to put me to bed in the middle of the afternoon because I didn't want to see the babysitter. I was so shy. I was extremely shy. But now, looking back on it, what I know about mental health, that was not necessarily being shy. That was anxiety. That was extreme social anxiety, and that's what that was. And that kind of continued through my life, and it ran its course, right? I see a lot of personality questionnaires and things people talk about what develops in your personality, and it's in I think my mental health struggle has led me to be the person that I am, and I think it's been okay. It certainly had its challenges. You know, when I was by the time I reached my teenage years, the anxiety, because I didn't know how to deal with it or cope with it, it had kind of morphed into depression, which often happens with a lot of people. Unchecked anxiety becomes depression, and sometimes vice versa. And at the time when I was younger, I remember it was bad enough that I went and saw a psychiatrist, and I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety disorder. And the type of anxiety disorder has changed over the years, but that's something who I am. And when I was younger, I actually went through a very bad episode of depression, probably the worst one of my life. And it was it's 17, 18-year-old, completely self-absorbed into my own head, and attempted suicide. And it was something that kind of, again, it kind of helped me to see things differently. That experience, it taught me something. It taught me something about myself, and what I'm capable of. And I think it shaped my future course. It took me a couple of years after that, a marriage and a divorce and some kids and all that good stuff before I decided to go back to school and become a social worker. But I knew that I wanted to help people, and it's ever since that time in my life, I've kind of lived my life one day at a time, wanting to make the life a little bit better, making the world a little bit better, one bit at a time, no matter what that is. Sometimes it's a small thing, sometimes it's a big thing. It's like everything else. I think that it's, like I said, it's kind of helped me kind of adjust and grow and made me into who I am. So I was a professional social worker by trade for quite a few years. And interestingly enough, as soon as I started, working in the field, I wasn't really sure what field I wanted to go to, because social work is kind of a broad thing. You can do social work in a lot of different areas. But I was always attracted to mental health, and it just kind of led me there. It's because of my inner passion became my outer passion. It became, so most of my clients ended up having mental health issues, or that sounded bad when I say it like that, but they had mental health issues when they came to me.
That's the chicken and the egg story, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I ended up, most of my clients had mental health issues, which led me to to eventually, I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do a project or something that was more than just one-on-one. I enjoyed doing one-on-one work. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of reward to sitting down with a client and helping them through an issue, and connecting them with a service and everything. That's really, really good, rewarding work. But I wanted to do something on a bigger scale, and so it kind of led me to mental health advocacy and education, where I'm able to do projects and programs that affect, instead of one person at a time, can affect hundreds or thousands of people at a time, and that gives me a sense of satisfaction that I'm able to have that big of an impact. It makes me feel like I'm doing something right, and it's. Some people, it's a think about, if you won the lottery tomorrow, would you quit your job? And if you think about that, that's a good question. And yeah, okay, I'm getting to the age where, okay, I'm getting a little gray in the sides here. And sure, I love the idea of a vacation and taking some time off and maybe traveling. But at the end of the day, what would I do with myself? And so I would probably continue to do what I'm doing, because this is just who I am. And so, if Dave, my boss, is watching, don't hold me to that. but yeah, that's how, if you love what you're doing, it's not just a job, it's part of who you are, right? Yeah.
All right.
So I don't know, that's a little bit about me. I mean, there's lots of fun details. I can tell you that along the way, because I was younger, and I got married the first time quite young, and I wasn't really sure about who I was. But anyway, I together with my current wife's children, I have 7 children, and they all started early as well. So I actually have 11 grandchildren.
Wow.
So that has taught me a lot.
I imagine. I was going to say that's a handful, but that's 2 or 3 handfuls.
It's a lot, yeah, and I wish they were all closer. I mean, but just because they're a few hours away, especially with COVID, I don't get to see them as often as I'd like. But it's So that's definitely part of who I am as well. So
yeah, I think the pandemic has made everyone further away, regardless of where they are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned something so I'm relatively new to the mental health, let's say, field. So I got involved as a fundraiser back in 2015, and as I learned more about what's going on with mental health and how it's there's just so much more that we need to know in order to be able to diagnose it effectively, treat it effectively. Um, so the more I learned about that, the more I discovered I don't know, and the more I found that we need a lot more work. So I've kind of stuck with it, and hopefully can to help push that ball in some small way, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things about labels, and you mentioned the diagnosis for anxiety. Your anxiety disorder has changed over the years. So that got me thinking: has the name for your symptoms changed, or have your symptoms changed?
I think actually, I think my symptoms have changed
Hmm.
throughout my life, depending on what I'm going through
Okay.
and where I am in my life. I'm I'm pretty adaptive. I try to learn new coping skills in order
Hmm.
to to kind of head things off. So
Okay.
when I was younger, it was more of we call it generalized anxiety disorder, which is kind of like a constant state of alertness,
Hmm.
um, which seems to contradict the constant feeling of depression when you are suffering depression. But often it's they ask somebody who has anxiety and depression and how it feels to feel that you feel like the world's falling apart, but you also feel like something's bad going to happen any minute. And
Hmm.
so it's that really like on heightened alert plus wanting to sleep all the time. I don't know. It's a very strange thing, but yeah, generalized anxiety disorder. And I think another one that's affected me over the years is panic disorder.
Hmm.
And so that's, you've probably heard the stories of people who um, have moments of almost physical symptoms that feel like a heart attack.
Hmm.
Shortness
Yeah.
of breath, chest pain, weakness, sweating. To all who are looking, it looks like a heart attack. It does, and
Hmm.
that's a panic attack in my case. And I've had to continue to look at that and kind of focus on how to do some mindfulness meditation in order to kind of talk my way out of it and focus on wellness and I find techniques that like visualization and meditation work for me,
Hmm.
but it's still not perfect. I still have bad days. I still have
Hmm.
days when it almost feels like I can't go to work, but it's something that you learn to adapt to.
Hmm. Hmm.
It
Yeah, my oldest sister, Terry, says, and she's let's say much older than me. Not so much. It's maybe 5 or 6 years. But
Yeah.
anyway, she has struggled with depression for years, but with a little gray at the temples, there have been a lot of episodes, and she's found some of the things that help her, right? Like as you have, and just little tools
Yeah.
and little changes of attitude. One of her biggest thing is if she starts feeling that she's going into this downward spiral, that familiar set of thoughts or feelings, she'll put on her shoes and go outside for a walk in the sunshine, get a little sunshine, a little fresh air, a little endorphins, or whatever. The walk helps her, right?
Yeah, it's and there's a few techniques that I think are probably the most useful ones that I've had in my life that are now part of just who I am that I don't even think about them. And you can learn a lot of them in CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things is I learned to call it cognitive restructuring, and that's just when you're faced with a situation, you're automatically interpreting it in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and your emotional reaction is based on your interpretation of that event.
Right.
And so when you're feeling that, you're starting to feel the anxiety. The first thing I do is, okay, well, and I kind of just step back, even just for a second, just kind of look at it. How else can I interpret what's going on in the moment?
Mm-hmm.
So I restructure the way that I'm thinking about it. And there's a direct correlation between what you think and what you feel. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people can't they have a hard time understanding that, but you really do almost create your own reality. If you think the worst scenario is going to happen, it causes you to have an emotional reaction that leads to all kinds of negative feelings and even illnesses. And so cognitive restructuring, or just changing the way you think, can change the way you feel and can lessen the stress reaction. And I don't mean to simplify that. That's not simple. It takes some training, but it is something that can work.
Yeah, training's a key thing there, right? Because your inclination is not to do that. It's to let's say escalate, right? It's to keep going down that road. And yeah, it's like it's kind of like saying, when you're in a dark place, talk to someone you trust. The last thing you want to do in a lot of cases is pick up the phone and talk to someone, right?
Yeah, it's like you said with your sister, when she's feeling her depression coming on, and the same thing with me when I feel it. It's Winston Churchill referred to the depression as the black dog, big black dog, right? And so to me, it almost, I can feel, this is my visualization. I can feel the black dog breathing on my neck, and it makes me realize, okay, I got to get out. I got to go for my walk. I got to do something to get physically active, because if I'm not, it'll push me right over the edge, and I could be put out for weeks or months, depending on the situation. And so, yeah, it's not in that moment. The last thing you want to do is go for a walk.
Right.
You want to curl up in a ball and go to sleep.
Yeah.
But history has taught you that you can't do that, because that will have negative consequences. And so, get out. Go for a walk, go do something, and you will feel better. It doesn't mean that going for a walk is a cure. It's a way to maintain your mental health. It'll elevate your internal chemistry, give you some positive endorphins while you're exercising. Your body will be in better shape. There's all kinds of things that happen when you go for exercise that actually will make a difference.
Yeah, it's kind of looking at it as a reduction of symptoms, right, as opposed to the cure.
Yeah, exactly. I know that because of the campaign Defeat Depression that I helped run, it's people often tell me that you can't defeat depression. No, but you can fight it. You can. There's things you can do to fight it, and well, I could talk about that in a minute about defeat depression and what that means, but it's a mindset. It's a thought process, right?
Yeah, let's talk, or why don't you talk about some of the things that the Mood Disorder Society has done over the years. One of the reasons that I got involved with the Mood Disorder Society was, well, Dave's just a really convincing speaker. When we met, he said I should. So no, I was really impressed with the kind of work that that you guys are doing, right? The outreach, the education, workplace, and some really specific programs. I've been through the peer support training, and there's some really good things that those guys are doing, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I'm fortunate enough. Dave and I have worked together well, we've known each other for 20 years now, and we've worked together for a little over 18 years. While we worked together, it's the same thing. We had the same kind of vision of just trying to make things a little bit better for the world, right? And so we share that kind of vision. And so when I came to work with him at Mood Disorders, which is about 6 plus years ago, it was an opportunity to kind of get back into my passion and do what I love. And Mood Disorder Society of Canada it's a smaller organization, but it has a huge mandate, right? In that there's only a handful of staff, but the programs that we run have a large impact, across the country. And it's a pretty unique perspective that we take. I mentioned that my own experience as a social worker, and as a social worker, you never talk about your own experiences. It was just not something. So I never talked about my own anxiety, depression, or anything like that. It was just, I was always client focused, right? So, so when I had to do my first presentation, talk about my own lived experience, I began to see the passion there. And so working for an organization that takes that passion, that lived experience, a passion, and uses that as its driver, it is extremely important to me, right? And so, most of the staff and the board, all quickly are easily identify as having lived experience and lived experience with mental health issues. I'll talk about that term in a minute. Yeah, and so we take that perspective. Sometimes people refer to us as a peer group or perhaps a patient group. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we still have the work to do and try to be the voice of the people that don't necessarily have a voice. People who are suffering from mental illness, especially mood disorders, often feel isolated and detached from society and feel like they don't have a place. And so as an organization, we want to be that voice for those who cannot speak up, right? And so in our advocacy role, we are talking to, different levels of government, to organizations, to individuals, all at different levels, talking about the importance of everything from increasing funding levels to access to services and medication and all the things that directly impact the people that we serve. It's different because, from my perspective in my role, it's my lived experience that is almost more important than my professional experience, which is different than what I had in previous jobs. So yeah, as an organization, we continuously grow and take on new programs and new initiatives in order to address that need, in order to fill the need of what's the priority at the moment, right? Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, combat stress syndrome, PTSD, and those types of issues were starting to come to the fore around 10, 15 years ago. And we quickly adapted and knew that this was something we had to get involved with and develop programs specifically for veterans and published material directly to help that population who needed the help that was out there. As time gone on, especially in the last year and a half, 2 years with COVID, there is a huge need for resources and information to educate people on how to manage their own mental health. Mm-hmm. Because although we focus on the physical consequences of COVID, and think about all the variants of concerns and talk about all the stats, how many people diagnosed each year dies in the ICU, all the stats that you hear you can't avoid that kind of stuff in the news, right? Mm-hmm. But we hear that and don't realize what it's doing to us, right? Mm-hmm. It's caused us to be in a sense of heightened alertness that I talked about, that anxiety disorder, mm-hmm. that heightened alertness all the time. Mm-hmm. And so you've got the rates of anxiety disorders have more than quadrupled, which, as you know, the correlation between anxiety and depression has led to more than doubling the level of depression. And that's unheard of. Mm-hmm. And ever since, I don't know if there's stats from wartime in the Second World War or other periods, but I know that in my history, in my time of working in this field, never have I seen the impact of one particular worldwide event that has had such an impact as this pandemic has had on mental health. Mm-hmm. It's just incredible. And so, and you think about who gets impacted the most by that, right? And so those that are already diagnosed with a mental illness, those who are struggling to get a diagnosis and understand who they are and what they're going through, those are the people that need the help the most, right? So, I think about our homeless population and how many of those homeless populations are veterans that they just have not been able to access care. The fact that they've served our country and given their all and have not been able to get the help that they need. That's personally, I find that very frustrating. My family comes from a military family. My dad was a military. My grandfather was military. My great grandfather was military. I grew up in Petawawa, so it's something that's very passionate to me. So we are always looking for new projects and new ways for us to bring about things that are going to help people. There's a couple of things that I can't go into specifics right now because they're still in the up and coming phase, but there's some opportunities where technology that is being developed now can directly play a role in improving individuals' wellness, and it's one of the things that happens with mental health is you feel isolated and alone. And especially during COVID, you can't go out and talk to somebody. You talk to somebody on a screen, but having a conversation is extremely important, right? And so things like a lot of research being done in AI and the machine learning and things like that, and how that can play a role in affecting someone's wellness. That is something that's extremely interesting. Just those conversations are in general are very, 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 very important. Which brings us to one thing that's the project that kind of connected us, Clay. 6 years ago, 7 years ago. 7 years ago, right? 7 years.
Yeah, I think six.
I'm feeling old, but yeah, it's this banner behind me, and that's one of our bigger projects, that Defeat Depression, and that was sprung out of the idea of how partners who are delivering frontline mental health services are underfunded. That we know that for every dollar that's spent in healthcare, only 7 cents of that dollar is spent in mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So how do these organizations survive and actually offer the services that they need, especially now when donations from charities are down significantly, and their demand for services are increased threefold. Mm-hmm. And so the only way for them to provide that kind of support is through fundraising. And so the Defeat Depression campaign is a fundraising platform with a bit of a spin. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're a national nonprofit charity, so we need to raise money for ourselves once in a while. But most of this campaign in particular was designed with the purpose of raising money for other organizations. Mm-hmm. And so every time we hold an event, a walk run usually, in any community, it helps to support a local organization that's providing frontline service. Mm-hmm. Whether that's the Pottle Center in St. John's, Newfoundland, or Mental Health Recovery Partners in Victoria, BC. From one end of the country to the other, it's all about providing the type of real assistance that these organizations need, all at the same time of kind of talking about a subject that's so very important, right? When we, this Defeat Depression idea, the subject of Defeat Depression and why we need to talk about it and everything. Yes, it's a fundraising campaign, but it's also an awareness campaign that every time somebody has a conversation about it, every time you wear the Defeat Depression logo, every time you talk to somebody about it, it increases awareness and changes that conversation and kind of normalizes that conversation. I told you I would go off on a rant.
That's all right. No, you're covering a lot of parts, I guess, reasons why people talks exists, right? Yeah. The value of people sharing their story, not just there's not just value in someone hearing the story and identifying some common parts in their lives and understanding that that they're not alone, and maybe getting a couple little tips here and there. But as you said, when you first started working with Mood Disorder Society, that you part of your presentation, part of your talk, part of your role was sharing your story. And when you share your story, when you voice those things that, well, I guess a lot of people have kept hidden and dark for a long time, when you bring that out to the light, you can look at it a little bit differently, right? And there's a huge value in that.
It's incredible the power that stigma has on us. We don't. I don't think until you really see it, you don't realize how big of an impact it has. And I've been doing this for most of my life now. And I can tell you that there are days when I have, like I said, my anxiety becomes so bad, or I'm battling a really bad depressive episode. I'll get on the phone and I'll call Dave, and my instinct is to say, I have a flu, I have a cold, I have some kind of physical ailment that justifies me needing to take time. And luckily, I've come to the point where now I'm realizing, you know what, that's ridiculous. That's denying the legitimacy of my own illness, and I'm stigmatizing myself. And so, the stigma does that. Think about, for me, I'm very open. I'm sharing my story about mental health and all this great stuff, and here I am stigmatizing myself. Imagine somebody who has never had this conversation, who has never once in their life talked about mental health, and all of a sudden they're facing a crisis, a mental health crisis. How are they going to ask for help? You know what I mean? There's huge barriers to overcome. Not that long ago, actually, I had a conversation. I was interviewed for a podcast called Candid, and her audience is mostly immigrant African women, and how we talked about how mental health has such a significant stigma for new Canadians, and in particular her population that we were talking about, and it's those barriers go on top of the ones we're already talking about. So storytelling is important, because when I say things like we have to normalize the conversation, that's it sounds a little wonky, but it's true. We as much as we talk about a physical illness, we have to talk about our mental illness in the same way. And we've got to stop downplaying it. We got to stop pushing it aside like it's not important, or that mental illness is not a character flaw. It doesn't mean that you're weak. And in some cases it does not mean that you're lacking faith. For some people that's a legitimate thing. Right. That mental illness is seen as a lack of faith, and it's not. It's an illness, right? It's an illness as much as any illness, and it should be treated that way. So that one of my favorite conversations that I have with people when they ask me about mental health versus mental illness, and there is a difference. We recently did a bunch of posts on our social media talking about that. Because even in my lifetime, I've used the term mental health concern. Instead of saying mental illness, we'll say mental health concern, because it's like a softer way to say it.
Right.
But mental health is a sense of well-being. It's an optimal state, right? It's like physical health. You want to be physically healthy, right? But an illness is like a mental illness is like a physical illness. It's something that's gone wrong inside your body that's causing you to act or feel in a way that's not typical, right? So it's not constructive. So an illness, like any other physical illness, needs to be treated. And if you don't seek treatment, you get worse, right? If you think about it, if you've got a bit of a cough and your chest infection, and if you don't get that treated, eventually it turns into pneumonia. Next thing you know, you're in the hospital and you're having trouble breathing. Especially in the time of COVID, you can imagine the implications of that, not seeking treatment. Well, With depression, it's exactly the same thing. If you don't treat depression, if you don't seek treatment when you're going through a depressive episode, it gets worse, and it leads to suicidal ideation. And suicidal ideation is the mental equivalent of chest pains, right? If you are feeling thoughts of self-harm and thoughts of suicide, that is an alarm bell that should be ringing in your brain, telling you that you need to see somebody as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
You should not ever dismiss those thoughts and say, "Oh, that was just, that was nothing."
Mm-hmm.
If you're feeling that way, you need to talk to somebody. You need to talk to your doctor. You need to talk to a therapist. You need to talk to a friend, or even somebody. You need to tell somebody that you're feeling that way. It's just so important. And
That's a good analogy. That's it's the equivalent of chest pains when you're physically sick, right? If us guys with a little bit of gray, if there's chest pains, I'm calling 911, man.
yeah, yeah.
You
Well,
know.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, we dismiss it. We were raised in a culture that we're told to just toughen up, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
I got it. And don't get me wrong, I think that mental health affects everybody, but there is a fact that men's mental health is an issue because for generations, men have been told that you certainly don't ever show weakness.
Mm-hmm.
You don't talk
Yep.
about your feelings. And if you have a mental illness, you sure as heck would never talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if you look at statistics, you're going to say that the number of people diagnosed with depression is usually higher amongst women. But coincidentally, that the people that are more prone to die by suicide are men.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So to me, those two stats kind of are coincidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because most men don't seek help.
Right.
They don't go for help, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't ask for assistance, right?
I think there's in the past 15 years maybe or so, there's been some good news in the area of stigma. What would you call it? Abatement. So a stigma around mental health. I think there's I mean, I wrote a little rambling newsletter piece for a local online mental health magazine this past week about news, what we see in the news, and there's a lot of bad news about COVID-19 and the associated drop in or increase in mental health issues, but the good news in that is that we're measuring now incremental changes in people's mental health. So there have been a couple of stats, I don't know, Stats Canada, but reports across Canada from surveys, and there have been, I've seen numbers. There's been a 30% increase in people's feelings of being in a poor mental health state. 25 years ago, if you asked people, are you feeling a little bit better, a little bit worse, it would be digital. No, I'm fine. Or I'm in a really, really terrible place. But now we're able to quantify a little bit more. And that's awesome. That's information that can be acted upon, right? When I first talked to my mom in 2014, 2015 about doing the first Canal Pursuits, and I'm doing it as a mental health awareness thing. One of the things is to fight the stigma around mental health issues. She lost two sons. I lost two brothers, right, to suicide. And she said when she was growing up, there was a stigma around the C word. People didn't say the word cancer. People died of cancer. But you didn't talk about it. People went away to a hospital and didn't come back, and nobody died of cancer. It was natural causes. Now it's one of the scourges of our lifetime, but there's not that stigma around cancer. And I'm thinking, even in the past 4 years, 3 years, we're starting to see obituaries that show died by suicide. And we never saw that in the newspaper. You wouldn't see that 10 years ago, right?
No, no, no. We have definitely we've come a long way, and I think it's important to note that especially Canada, as a country, we've improved significantly. And I don't want to say that we've reached where we want to go, but we're heading in the right direction.
Right.
You know, if you look at the comparison between cancer and mental illness, and think about that, what is it that caused people to change their perception of cancer? Why is it acceptable now to talk about it? Why is it okay for somebody to say, I have a diagnosis of cancer, where, you know what I mean? And honestly, it comes down to the same thing. People talk about it. They just started opening up about it. And education is important, that we begin to understand where these things come from, right? Before, cancer was seen as something that, you know, they didn't know where its cause was or what its root was, and maybe you were living an immoral life or making bad life choices, and so maybe people would think that you shouldn't talk about that because it would say something about your personality or your who you are. And that's the same. It's the parallels are quite interesting when you think about it, because that's how we think about mental illness. It's the same thing. We somehow think that if you have a mental illness, it means that you came from a bad family, that maybe you don't have access to treatment, or maybe you're making bad life choices, or any number of things. And don't get me wrong, addiction is a mental illness. Okay, so you shouldn't ignore that. But even with addiction, mental illness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor. It doesn't care if you're educated or not educated. It doesn't matter if anything. It can affect you at any time. If something happens, even if genetically you're more predisposed to it, it can affect you. And it affects more people than probably we're aware of. It just, we still don't talk about it enough. So we got to talk about it more. We've got to keep going the direction that we're heading. And somebody asked me, well, aren't you worried if you continue the education and advocacy work that you do, maybe you'll work your way out of a job? And I'm like, I will gladly give that up. I will if there comes a day when we don't have to talk about mental health because it's just a normal part of our conversation, then I'll retire. Like I told you earlier, I'm going to win the lottery and I'm going to retire. Then I'll take it. I'll be gone.
Yeah, it's funny. I think a change in attitude like that, unfortunately, probably takes a generation, right? But I think I've done a couple of talks in high schools and middle schools, and that generation is teenagers already. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see a lot of I forget what they call the youngest generation, the ones that are born after 2010. I don't know. There's a name for it, but they're very, very open about this, and it's just a normal part of the conversation, and that's a good thing. Thank goodness. But yeah, it's definitely a generational thing, and there's still a lot of people out there who carry old opinions, and hopefully that just kind of fades away, right? It's like everything else. In a progressive world that I believe that we live in, things like mental illness will be come to the spotlight the same way that now when we think about feminism. And although feminism has certainly not done its fight, I mean, there's certainly a lot of work to be done in that front. But think about feminism now compared to 60 years ago. That's a significant change. Think about gender equalities and sexual or equality, things like that. That has come a long way in the last 40 years, right? I think that although there's a plenty of work to do in race relations and and prejudice and racism, things like that. That at least now we know enough that even majority of the population say, hey, this shouldn't happen like that. And you know, I get a kick out of when I see somebody in a situation like that. Everybody kind of says, hey, what are you doing? Why are you talking like that? Because that's not something we want to talk about, right? So it means that as a society, I'm call me an optimist. I really believe that we will get better, and we do get better. And mental illness is just one of those things that the more we talk about it, the better it will get, and we'll become better at it. You know, I think about a lot of the Scandinavian countries and how they don't have mental health hospitals. And why? It's because it's a community thing, and the community treats it, and it's accepted in the community. And I think that's where we got to get to, where it's something that we understand that, hey, you know what, you have a cold. Here's some way to treat a cold and help you with that cold, and let me get you some soup. Or if you're going through a depressive episode, okay, I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to talk with you. I'm going to make sure you're okay. And you know, it's not rocket science. It's not. It's just a change in perception.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of research going on in brain function, brain activity, and so the physical. A lot of people want to see something physical, right? Something you can quantify, something that you can write rules about, and that's what my right or left brain engineering mind wants to see. If I have this, and this, that means I have this, and I can treat it with this, right? There's the book. What is it? Something that ends with a 5.
I can't remember.
That psychiatrists use to diagnose.
Oh, the DSM-5, yes.
Yes, yeah, and that's kind of the rule book. I've never read it, but that's kind of the current rule book for diagnosing mental health, mental illness. But I think there's or that's the way I understand it anyway. But there's still a lot of gray area, right? We still have a lot to learn.
Yeah, there is tons of work that needs to be done in research, absolutely, because up until even now, we have some hypotheses, but we don't have a lot of clinical data to support those assumptions. And even in the DSMV, or the DSM-5, it's based on observation, right?
Right.
When you demonstrate a certain behavior in a certain length of time in a certain conditions, it leads to a diagnosis. And don't get me wrong, I think that's an essential part of what we do as a society. We begin to understand, different mental illnesses, but the diagnosis helps to kind of point you in the direction of a treatment.
Right.
But it's not the end. The diagnosis is really just to kind of, okay, it's over there somewhere. It's your individual symptoms and your individual experience that you have to treat, right? At the end of the day, whether I call it bipolar disorder or depression, it doesn't really matter if I'm treating depressive episodes, right?
Right.
At the end of the day, you treat symptoms. And the symptoms for mental illness can be treated with medication, but also through therapies and a lot of other treatments that are available out there. A lot of really good, interesting stuff, actually. But yeah, you're right. Tons of research needs to happen for us to really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people who are proposing that depression is caused by a nutrient deficiency. I don't know if that's based on any truth. I'm just saying some people are saying it. So I don't know. There's more research needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. There's been some really good stuff on PTSD and the parts of the brain that are responsible for experience and feelings and storing memories and organizing and the way the what's broken to cause an episode, right? It's pretty interesting stuff. But
myself, I'm little obsessed right now with complex PTSD, or what they sometimes refer to as complex trauma.
Okay.
How it's different than it's different yet the same, similar than what we typically think of as PTSD.
Hmm.
We think of like a combat stress syndrome, or an occupational stress injury, or a moral injury. There's a good one, moral injury.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, a complex stress or complex trauma is something that is it does often come from your childhood, and it doesn't necessarily come from one specific incident. It can come from a series of things that happen in a certain environment that causes you to have a trauma response to different situations. And there's a lot of people out there who are treating other mental illnesses that they just haven't been kind of led to the complex trauma discussion. And
Okay.
to realize, if you look at some of the symptoms of complex trauma, and I encourage you to do a little research afterwards, what complex trauma is all about and what it
Hmm.
looks like, and be amazed, because there's a lot of people, even myself, I'm like questioning that some of my symptoms might be actually based on some complex trauma that I've had through my life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yeah, it like I said, it's something in my little. I didn't tell you this, but when I was younger and I was that anxious child, I was always analyzing myself. That's
Hmm.
part of my anxiety. I analyze myself,
Hmm.
and I always wondered why people think the way they think, why they act the way they do. I've
Hmm.
always thought that way, and so I'm kind of like you in that engineering way, except in
Hmm.
a psychology way.
Right.
I want to know what makes people tick.
Yeah.
I want to know why do they think? What made you want to do that? What made you
Yeah.
want to make that decision? And so yeah, understanding that is it's an evolving thing. It's
Hmm.
like any science, right? And
Hmm.
one thing, even cancer, what we knew about cancer 40 years ago is different than what we know about cancer today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
For
mental
sure.
illness in 40 years, yeah, it could change completely,
Hmm.
right? Certainly, I know the treatments, it's got to change.
Yeah.
And you think about 40 years ago, what treatment was for mental illness, it was basically put you into a hospital and that was it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Physically alter part of your brain, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And longer, yeah, before that, it was actually remove a piece of your brain, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's barbaric. And you
Mm.
think about some of the things that they did that they called psychological treatment over 60, 70 years ago. Right now, we would like, whoa, that's not humane. And I mean,
Yeah.
that is not a treatment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe
I
we'll get
think
to the
we're.
point where we'll talk about our current treatments in the same way. I don't know.
Mhm. Yeah. Really. Eh? Another good thing I think I'm seeing in the last little while uh, is business analysis of the value of mental health programs in the workplace
Yeah,
and the return on investment.
yeah,
A small investment, especially with larger companies where investment can be amortized or analyzed in a little more detail. A small investment in mental health for their staff has a huge impact on reduction of number of sick days and a bunch of other things, right?
yeah.
And business can be a big driver.
Well, yeah, yeah,
That's a good thing,
absolutely.
right?
Because the cost of the Canadian economy is, it just, people don't realize how that affects people. It benefits, the number one cause of disability in benefits is mental illness,
Hmm.
right? Depression is one of the highest ones there, right? So, and the cost, those people who are not even going off on sick leave or long-term disability are suffering from loss of productivity or absenteeism, right? That
Hmm.
affects the bottom line of every business. That's why
Yeah.
I think it was the conference board that has the number of 51 to 52 billion dollars a year into the Canadian economy that's affected by mental illness. So yeah, absolutely, yeah. There, and so everything you can do to improve well, here's a term: psychological health and safety of your workplace.
Hmm.
And that's, when you say that to somebody who's never heard that before, it's a kind of a unique concept. But it's, as much as you're looking at your workplace and you're making sure you don't physically injure yourself,
Hmm.
you have to examine your workplace and wonder, and ask, sorry, lose my voice. You have to ask, what are we doing to prevent psychological injury?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is there policies, is there procedures, is there things that we're doing as an organization that are directly harmful to our staff? And there are.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that we do without realizing in the efforts to improve productivity. We lose track that we're dealing with people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah, for
people
sure.
have certain needs and
Yeah.
they need to be met, or productivity will suffer.
Yeah, for sure. We're not robots. I just discovered about a year and a half ago that there's a thing called mental health first aid.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to cut it short here pretty soon. We're approaching an hour, and are there any things on your big list of topics that you wanted to cover that we haven't covered yet?
Well, I wouldn't be doing my job, Clay, if I didn't mention that this is Mental Health Week this week,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the first week of Mental Health Month of May, and it's the last month of our Defeat Depression campaign, and so between now and May 29th, which is the end of our campaign. In a normal year, that 29th of May is usually when we would be holding all of our walks and runs across Canada.
Right.
But because we're doing virtual walks, it's kind of a month long, where between now and then, register and support mental health by going to defeatdepression.ca, sign up and participate in some fundraising and raise some money to help support your local mental health organizations, because they need it. They need your help. And do some physical activities, tell your people what they need to do, make it fun, make it entertaining. But yeah, absolutely, between now and the end of the month. And then of course on May 29th, we will be holding a live stream session on our Facebook page. So sign in, you'll be entertained and informed, and have a great time for about an hour. And then you can join in the local events as well.
Right. I'll put the links in the end credits. So after I fade away, hit pause and you'll be able to write down the info.
There you go. All right.
Awesome. Yeah. The end of May is it's changed a lot this year compared to 2 years ago. Last year was it was quiet as well, right? But
yeah.
I
look forward to the day when we're going to be able to actually get together as a group of people. I can remember going to events where a couple hundred people are at our walks, and
mm-hmm.
they're all just having a good time, wearing the shirts and
mm-hmm.
and going for a walk together. The power of that is just overwhelming when you see
mm-hmm.
everybody there for that same cause. I can remember here in North Bay, where I live, there's our North Bay Defeat Depression. The first year we did it was in 2019,
mm-hmm.
and it was pouring rain. It was cold and rain, and there was over 100 people that came out to our first event in the middle
mm-hmm.
of that pouring rain, were to support Defeat Depression and to
mm-hmm.
show that this is an important thing. So
nice.
I long for the time when we can get together in person and do that again.
Mm-hmm.
Until then, let's stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe. I got my shot a few days ago. So.
Yeah, me too, actually.
All right. Cool. Thanks very much, Ken. I really appreciate the time that you set aside to speak with me and our audience.
I appreciate it, Clay. I hope that if your audience has any questions, that they reach out. Go to the Mood Disorders website, check out the Defeat Depression campaign. Go look at depressionhurts.ca as well, which is another good resource to check out. And yeah, all the best. Take care of yourselves.
All right. Thanks.